It was round about the age of 9 or 10 when I actually got my diagnosis. And fast forward years, and I never spoke about my Tourette syndrome at all. In fact, even the word Tourette, like we had to call it the T word. I was so embarrassed by it. I was so scared by it. It couldn't be said around me. It was like saying Voldemort in Harry Potter. It was just a word that should not and could not be used. And if I ever heard that word in public, it would send shivers down my spine and I'd shatter into a million pieces. Because when I was growing up, I was always made to feel so ashamed by it. I didn't know anyone in my community who had Tourette. No one was there to make me feel calm or comforted by it. It was just this weird thing that I was made to feel like I was some kind of circus freak.
Welcome to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering children and adults through education, advocacy, and research by sharing the stories and experiences relevant to the TS community. Hello, and thank you for joining this episode of The Uptick. I'm thrilled to be here today with Aidy Smith. Aidy is a London-based, award-winning TV presenter, journalist, and speaker. He's one of the world's only TV hosts with Tourette syndrome, and he's the executive producer and presenter of the hit Amazon Prime series, The Three Drinkers. Aidy has a passion for good drinks, lifestyle, travel, and diversity topics, and he's a powerful advocate and spokesperson for the LGBTQIA+ and disability communities. He also recently launched a new Tourette documentary, The Truth Behind the Tic, which is available on Spotify and other streaming platforms. Aidy, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
You as well. Well, I wanted to chat about the documentary that you just came out with. I understand it's a two-part series. The first just came out last week on TS, and then the second part is on ADHD. Talk to me about what inspired you to produce these.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really on this kind of mission to get out as much neurodiversity content as I possibly can. And so I'm trying to team up with a lot of the larger radio stations or broadcasters in order to be able to do this. There is a station in the UK called Virgin Radio, which is one of our biggest stations over here. And they have a station that they bring out for about 6 months of the year called Virgin Radio Pride, where they essentially look at LGBTQIA+ topics about ethnicity representation, and topics about disability diversity. So it sounded like the perfect platform to work with them on some documentaries. So I got two separate documentaries that have come out. The first one being on Tourette syndrome and the second one being on ADHD. But I mean, it's fascinating, looking at both of them, because as we know, around 85% of people with Tourette's have a co-occurring condition. So for those of us who have ADHD or think we might have ADHD, it's actually a really intriguing listen as well.
No, absolutely. And getting more awareness on this is always great. What's the reception been? And I know this just was within the last week or so. Have you had any sense so far of the reaction it's getting?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? It's brilliant. And I'm so thankful for the support. I think that our community are just phenomenal. As soon as a piece of content comes out that does the right job, that has the right messaging to be able to help them and push us forward and get momentum, people really embrace it. And I've had countless people reaching out, not just to kind of say, this is great, I've been inspired by this, but at the same time, parents getting in touch to ask questions about their kids who may have Tourette, about a new diagnosis someone has. And for me, when I get more of those questions coming through, that is a sign of success, because that shows that this documentary has reached the people who need it the most, who are able to ask those questions and who are able to be, guided on their journey. I think one of the major things that we need in the Tourette community and the kind of the next big hurdle we need to overcome is allowing people to embrace who they are and feel like they belong. And that's what this kind of content does when it's done correctly. Because I will add that there have been many things in the past, as we know in the media, that focus on either just one element of Tourette syndrome, or, they'll have a whole shoot done and they'll pick out only the most extreme tics that someone has, which isn't a true representation of how they actually are. And that's all for entertainment purposes. This documentary that we did here, sure, it delved into the hardships and it delved into the challenges that we as a community face. We looked at the stigmas and the misconceptions that plague our community and really make life a hurdle and a challenge for us. And we tapped into the harrowing rates of people who consider or actually take their own lives, because this is the most mocked condition on the planet. There is no getting around that. And we take a deep dive into those hard topics because they're real. They're a reality. And at the same time, we take a look and have a glimpse of another side of Tourette syndrome that is our remarkable ability to thrive. And, when we take that excess energy that goes into our tics and we rechannel it into what we love doing, we do become that force of nature. It does become a superpower. So we touch upon all angles of what it is to live with Tourette syndrome, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful.
I love that. There's so many things in there I'm excited to dive into. I want to start with the comment you made around making a well-produced Tourette educational, like informative piece. And you mentioned that it could be done right, it can be done not right. I want to focus on what makes something good, and if we want to be advocates for Tourette, one of the challenges I see is that Tourette is idiosyncratic. It's not like you can just meet a person with it and, okay, I understand Tourette now. All of us are different. We have not only variances, dramatic differences in our tics, but also, as you said, the comorbidities, the severities of those, the manifestations of those, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, depression. And so we're all this, each this kind of the salad bar idea that Tourette ends up creating in all of us. How do we accurately and honestly have a representation and advocacy for people with Tourette, knowing that there is so much variety and that no two people are the same? It's so easy to just find ourselves, stereotyping or generalizing, and even well-intentioned people. Is the solution there just to talk to lots and lots of people, get lots and lots of examples elevated and highlighted? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It is to get a true representation of what's going on. And in order to do that, you do need to tell different stories. When it comes specifically to a documentary, coprolalia, for example, 10% of people with Tourette syndrome have coprolalia. And there's this whole notion right now of people saying, yeah, but that's not me. 90% of us don't have it. And that in a way kind of villainizes the 10% of people who do. And we need to get around that because, I had coprolalia when I was a kid. And I've been through that, and it is extremely challenging. It's one of the most harrowing situations you can go through. And we can't just kind of disclude the 10% of people who have coprolalia and say, well, you're not one of us because we don't swear. So we need to acknowledge that that is a part of it, like all different elements of Tourette syndrome are a part of it. I think that the tics that we witness and that we see are probably only about 20% in my mind of what Tourette syndrome is. We've seen that beautiful diagram of an iceberg, and the tics are kind of just the peak of that. Everything that falls underneath that are the co-occurring conditions, so we got the OCD, ADHD, in some cases, autism and Asperger's. You've got the insomnia, the depression, the anxiety. There are so many different things going on underneath the surface. And in a documentary format, we need to talk to people who represent as many of these as we can. And if we can't talk to everyone because it's simply impossible to do that, we need to explain to people that it is very much a spectrum condition, that there are so many different parts of it. And it's not just this kind of one fits all, one box solution. It is very complex. At the same time, we need to be able to translate the ins and outs of roughly what Tourette syndrome is and address the stigmas and the misconceptions that are out there. Because no, not everyone with Tourette syndrome swears. Some people do. This is why it's really difficult. This is why we need to acknowledge that and have an understanding of it. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge that 90% of people do not sit in, that 10%, and that they're going to be treated unfairly based on stigmas that are out there. It's those kinds of things that lead to 50% of people with Tourette's not going to higher education or not getting employment because they fear being judged. And, we've had leadership surveys come out, leadership management surveys that have looked at managers, and they've asked managers, would you employ this person? And the particular one that was focused around neurodiversity, roughly 1/3, so just over 1/3, about 35% of all the managers who took part in the survey said that they would never hire someone with Tourette syndrome out of fear that they couldn't manage them. But you and I both know that in the job that you're doing and the job that I'm doing, when it is our passion point, we soar and we go so much further than the everyday person on the street because it becomes our superpower. So that stat couldn't be further from the truth.
It's interesting, too, because the complexity of Tourette and how it manifests itself differently in each of us, the tics, but also the comorbidities also plays a big role in what we need because of it, in the ways of accommodations or how we want people to respond to our tics. So if we are in the workplace, our needs in our job could differ based on our individual, the manifestations of it. And I love the idea of Tourette's being kind of our superpower and transitioning it from a place of this is a disability to this is something that is complicated and also really makes me who I am. And it gives me a lot of great benefits. It's very intrinsically a part of me. I think there's an unspoken message there around the piece of self-advocacy that because of the uniqueness of Tourette's and the idiosyncrasies of it, it's on each of us to be our own best advocate. Is that something you'd agree with or can comment on?
Yeah, I think that that's spot on. I think that, there's a couple of difficult things here, aren't there? Because I know that a lot of people out there talk about Tourette's as a superpower. And then you have someone thinking, well, hold on a minute. It's not my superpower. It actually affects me really badly and I suffer from it a lot. And the whole notion of superpower has come along because I want the next generation of kids to look at Tourette syndrome, knowing that, yes, it's a hardship and it's a challenge, but, and there's a big but here, every challenge and hardship you go through will teach you something. It will teach you emotional intelligence. It will teach you cultural awareness. It will teach you empathy. And in doing those things, in going through those struggles and those hurdles, combining that with finding your passion point, that is what creates that superpower. And that's not to say that life still is not going to have its, challenges and hurdles. When I get up every day, I consider the fact, and I consider myself to have a superpower, my Tourette's, but that doesn't mean that it's still not difficult, that it's still not hard, that I still don't have chronic pain, that I still don't get depression and anxiety. Like I still get all of these things and more. But I just choose to focus on that superpower element to keep my mindset in the right place. So I don't fall into this deep, dark hole because I know that there are remarkable benefits from it. So I think touching upon, should we be our own, best self? Absolutely. And I think that we can be inspired by other people, but ultimately no one else can tell us what to do. It's up to ourselves to follow those passions. It's up to ourselves to find those remarkable things that we're great at. If we sit at home all day kind of moping in sadness about how hard our life is, we're never going to get anywhere. You've got to have the courage to go out there. But in order to have that courage and to really step out of your comfort zone, you have to go through pain. You have to go through challenges. You have to go through difficult moments. And just to reiterate that, I think that challenges, hurdles, and pain points are a good thing. They're not easy in the moment, but they help shape us into the people that we become.
No, that's spot on there. I mean, I think we too many people have this idea of the perfect Tourette advocate or the self advocate, where we know what we need, we know our needs, we advocate for ourselves at all times. Whenever we have the opportunity, we disclose our Tourette. We're always teaching others about it. And I think the reality is so much more complicated than that, because to your point, we do still have bad days. There are days when I get up and my tics are really bad and it's all I can do to get my 3 meals, to shower, to get my work done and go to bed. I have other days then when I am feeling more of that confidence and I don't have the chronic pain from my tics. I can focus a little bit more through the fog of my ADHD. I think like another important part of it is being loving and accepting of ourselves, knowing that we are going to have tougher days. And then to your point, seeing those tougher days as part of the journey, and we're better for it. They are tough, but they're also gaining that resilience, the emotional maturity, emotional intelligence, and we are stronger people for it. I love the message there.
A little story here. So I have a friend who actually came onto my ADHD documentary that I did, and he gave me a very good piece of advice. And it was simple. It was just be kind to yourself. A tactic that he's learned is talking to himself like other people would talk to you. So for example, if you got up in the morning, your tics were going and your ADHD is there and you're forgetful and you're not getting through a particular job that you were meant to do or a deadline, I'm not going to come around to your house and go, oh my God, Michael, you're such an idiot. You're so stupid. Like I would never do that. I'd say, Michael, do you know what? You're just having a bad day. And it's okay, like get through this, be kind to yourself at the moment, know that you need that little bit of time. And as soon as you get through this period, you will crack on with it and you'll kick ass again.
Mm-hmm.
And, his advice was just talk to yourself as if someone else would talk to you, because that in itself allows you to be so much kinder to yourself. And it works. It works. It really does.
I love that. No, absolutely. There are times like I know I am my harshest critic, and I see that a lot in this community and just in people in general. Also with anxiety, self doubt, depression, that can be a feature of it. I want to talk some about the progress we've made in the current state of advocacy. So I was diagnosed with Tourette when I was a kid back in 2003. I was diagnosed. 2008 is about the time I started getting involved in advocacy. Became a youth ambassador with the Tourette Association of America. I remember so much of the training they gave us and so much of my presentations. Basically the message was around a couple things. It was just very basics. Here's what Tourette's is. Here's what a tic is. I can't control it. It's not contagious. The basics things there, but also coprolalia was a big piece of it too. Just and addressing that misconception and to the point we said earlier, I think in a desire to address the media sensationalist portrayals of coprolalia, I think the pendulum kind of went far in the other direction, and we had a tendency to ostracize or other people in our community that have coprolalia. Now, not that the conversation isn't still there, that we're not still occasionally othering people with it. I am surprised. Actually, this just happened within the past week. I disclosed my Tourette's to someone who saw me ticking, and immediately I didn't even use the word tics, but they did. They mentioned something about, oh, what are your tics? They just knew. They knew the word tics. And to me, having been doing this since 2008, it was amazing to see people. And there's a number of examples of this I've seen in recent years, how we've actually made a lot of progress in the last 20 or so years. And now people know what that word is. They know that there's more to Tourette than coprolalia. I think that's also what's enabled some of us to now say, all right, actually, no, my tics kind of are a part of who I am. Like they actually are. I'm glad I have it and I wouldn't want it to go away. The more we shed that stigma, I think the more opportunity it gives us to embrace this stuff. But would love to hear your thoughts as well as an adult who presumably was diagnosed as a younger person, although I don't know. Have you also seen any kind of progression or journey or evolution there in just general Tourette awareness?
Absolutely. And to give you the story, so when I was 7, that's when my tics started coming out, around the age of like 6.5, 7. And it was round about the age of 9 or 10 when I actually got my diagnosis. And fast forward years, and I never spoke about my Tourette syndrome at all. In fact, even the word Tourette, like we had to call it the T word. I was so embarrassed by it. I was so scared by it. It couldn't be said around me. It was like saying Voldemort in Harry Potter. It was just a word that could not be used. And if I ever heard that word in public, it would send shivers down my spine and I'd shatter into a million pieces. Because when I was growing up, I was always made to feel so ashamed by it. I didn't know anyone in my community who had Tourette. No one was there to make me feel calm or comforted by it. It was just this weird thing that I was made to feel like I was some kind of circus freak. At school, I was bullied a hell of a lot. I was always made to feel like I had to be realistic about my options. I was told that I shouldn't go to university, that I probably shouldn't get a job, that I should just claim benefits, that I probably wouldn't be able to drive, that I'd never be able to join the army or the police force. But all of my dreams and things I aspired to achieve just seemed so far out of reach. And we look at where we've come from that period of time where everything was so far removed and we were looked at as people who could never achieve anything, to where we are now, where people are beginning to have this mentality that Tourette syndrome is this remarkable asset to our lives, not a weakness, but a strength. And we have come a long way. I think a lot of that has happened not even over the past 20 years. I think a lot of that has literally happened in the past 3 or 4 years. And I think what we're finding is that as more well-known people come forward and say that they have Tourette syndrome, and that filters out online, that's where we are seeing more of this progress made. However, at the same time, I do need to caution that when we have platforms like Instagram and TikTok, there are two kinds of content that can be created on there. That are the kinds of content with people such as Brittany Wolf, who you probably know well. Mm-hmm. And Brittany creates, advocation content explaining what Tourette syndrome is, about her experiences with it, and also gives tips to parents and teachers and communities on what they can do, while, honing on her own life and what's going on. And it's hard, but it's also funny in some ways. You're laughing with her at certain moments. And a lot of the content that I've tried to do has been very similar in that, explaining my journey, telling stories about what have happened, where Tourette's sometimes can be like funny moments I've had, but also sad moments I've had, the challenges I've overcome, the reality behind it, what some of my tics are. So that's one side of the content we have. Another side of the content we have to be very careful with. And this is where people who have tics create purely entertainment content. And here I'm talking about things like, here is me baking a cake with Tourette's, or here is me reading a book with Tourette's. And I think what we have to be very careful about is people creating content not to showcase the reality of living with Tourette syndrome, but to showcase the entertainment factor of Tourette syndrome. Because it would upset me a lot to know that someone was creating a video where their tics weren't necessarily as bad as they were playing on in that particular video, just to get more comments, likes, and reactions from it, to climb that influencer ladder. And I think that is something that we are seeing more and more crop up these days on TikTok. I just recently got TikTok. My agent told me that I was an idiot if I didn't get it and that he dropped me. So there was a polite threat of, you need to start doing that. We can't have a TV presenter who doesn't have TikTok. So I started using it and pushing out some of my Tourette's content on there. And I'm seeing more and more of this entertainment first style of content. And I think that is quite dangerous, because what that is doing is showcasing to our youth that they will never be able to bake a cake, that they will never be able to read a book, that driving is a very harrowing thing. And again, if it's done in a realistic way, absolutely love it, all for it. But my worry is if people are exacerbating things in the moment for pure entertainment versus the reality. And that scares me. That does scare me. So I think the people who are out there creating content need to take a look at not just their influence account or how much money they're being paid for branded content campaigns based on how many followers they have or how much money they're making from ads, but the community around them who they're out there to inspire and to help bring hope to.
It reminds me of another kind of related point, role models within the Tourette community. When I was growing up, for better or for worse, Tourette we didn't have TikTok, we didn't have Instagram, Facebook, any of that, but it was difficult to meet people, especially I grew up in the rural Midwest, and it was hard to meet people, get to know people, or even see people. There was just less visibility around Tourette, and especially neurodiversity, which we can get to later in a bit here. One of the things that frightens me in hearing this about the entertainment of Tourette syndrome is, if I were a kid and my tics were just starting, and you're already as a kid going through, trying to fit in the social pressures. It's hard. You just want to be normal, whatever that means. And I think if I had stumbled upon a video like that, it could have sent me into a not so good spiral, and also sent the message to me that my Tourette's is something that is entertaining, and that I should adopt that kind of clown persona, that I exist to entertain others and be kind of that class goofy kid. If someone wants to be that, all power to them. My whole thing would be for people to embrace their own identity and find their own calling. And I think when we see those videos, it does reinforce this. This is a role you have to play in society. You're different. The kind of the circus comparison you made. Yeah, definitely exposing that to young people, not a good thing.
We look at the movies that are out there that take the most comical parts of Tourette syndrome. So it's usually coprolalia, right? And what they'll do is they'll have a character that has the worst case of Tourette syndrome. The 1 percentile, not even that, the 0.1 percentile. They'll make all these tics up in the moment, and they'll portray that in the movie purely for entertainment factor. Now, what I'm left there thinking is, in some cases, how is that any different from what we're beginning to see on TikTok, where again, it's the worst case scenario of the particular situation? And to your point, that is scary for our youth, because if they see that, then they just look at their life that like they'll never be able to achieve anything, that it's always a hardship. Or they think, oh, hang on a minute, I can become a TikTok influencer just like this person, but I have to inhibit the same kind of behavior, because if I don't, no one's going to think I'm entertaining enough. So it's just this vicious revolving circle. And I think it's too early to tell what's actually going on in this TikTok sphere right now. It's too early to tell, but in the next few years, we'll have a better idea. And I just hope that it doesn't go off on some kind of dark pathway, because the internet is out there to help inspire us. It shouldn't be there to help create more darkness and doom.
Yeah, I think in the next few years, we'll see what's going on with everything there. Yeah, I would imagine that we have a few different camps of people. There are people that see this content and say, oh, I have that I do that uncontrollable movement. There's something similar to it. And maybe this is the first path for them to ultimately getting a diagnosis. Best case scenario, that this is a way to advocate. It's a way to get the word out. And I'm hoping that we can get as much of that as possible, and that this might be some growing pains of the internet right now. We'll see what happens in time to come. Curious to hear, though, if there's any other topics that come to mind when you think about advocacy and where our focus areas should be over the next 10 years, or even pick any amount of time, 1 year, 5 years. Let's say that when I was a kid, maybe the focus was just on, hey, Tourette's is a real thing that exists and not everyone swears. Here's what a tic is. As you look to the future, what do you think should be, or our biggest goals when it comes to spreading awareness, advocacy, and really getting to a world where we can tic freely?
So two things. The first one is a word that I still hear used because it's a medical word. It's a medical definition word. And it's the word comorbidities, which you mentioned earlier. Now, I'm on a mission to eradicate that word because I think that the word morbid, even though it's absolutely a medical word, I think that it's quite outdated. And so I'm on this mission to try and eradicate that word and turn it into co-occurring. And the reason for that is when I was a kid and someone told me I had comorbidities, I looked at the word morbid, and it's death, disgusting, disease. So immediately as you're a kid and you hear that word, you're like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I'm disgusting. And it's this word that no one's even thought about it because it's so ingrained in society. But if we take other similar words that are in the medical, dictionary, like spastic, for example, that is by all means, it is a medical term. Do we use that in today's society? Absolutely not, because it's offensive. And so I've had to speak to a lot of different kind of charities and medical organizations about replacing this word comorbidities with the word co-occurring conditions. Just because I think it's an updated vocabulary that is going to help people be a lot more reassured about their journey when they do get their diagnosis. So that's number one. Number two is to talk about, I just call it the reality of Tourette's. And it's talking about the fact that, yes, it's a challenge, but it's also a strength. And to get the reality of that story. Because on one side, if everyone's talking about it as a superpower constantly, then people are like, well, what's all the fuss about then? If it's a superpower, then like, good on you. You don't need any help. You're already thriving. But at the same time, there's a hell of a lot of weaknesses. But then, if we always talk about it as, this pain point, this challenge, this hurdle, then people are like, oh God, I don't want you anywhere around me because you're just going to be too difficult to deal with all the time. So it's this balance of the two. It's the conversation that I would like us to have is knowing that it is going to be a difficult journey, but knowing that beautiful things come out of it. And the quote I use for that is, there's strength in the struggle. There is a struggle there, but there's a remarkable strength that comes off the back of it. And that's what I want people to realize, because ultimately, if we continue this amazing, beautiful narrative that we have, what that's going to do is give people hope. It's going to allow people to feel like they belong, and it's going to allow people to embrace their Tourette's rather than run away from it. I spent my whole childhood and my youth running away from my Tourette's. It took my best friend dying when I was 24 for me to say, I need to do something with my life to help other people, just like he did. And that was the reason. That was literally the reason why I decided to start talking about Tourette syndrome. And once I started, I saw just how much of an impact it could have on our youth, on our kids who were getting the same level of bullying as I was when I was a kid and living in desperation, and parents who didn't know where to turn, and seeing the effect that had, and starting to see the outpour of messages come through from people saying, oh my God, I watched this. I never knew this was possible. Thank you so much for sharing this tip. I just spoke to my son and everything has changed this week. We were in this darkness over here, but we can see this light now. And it's that makes me want to keep going.
It is. It's the stories, and seeing the progress people can make. I noticed that too when growing up, and I would go to these public schools, K through 12th grade. What is that? In the UK, what do you call that?
How old were you at the time?
At this would be like 10, 11, 12.
Okay, so like just getting into secondary school for us.
That's secondary school there. Okay. Yeah, so I would go to these classrooms and speak on behalf of a student that had recently been diagnosed or was about to be. I would always try to get lunch with them because I was the high school here. I was the kind of the cool high school kid that was getting lunch with Zachary or whatever his name was. And when I used to speak about Tourette's, I always remembered the growth that you would see in the people afterwards. I would keep in touch with them and text them or email like after, some of them years later after I spoke to their classroom when they were recently diagnosed. I'd keep up with them years later and being able to see that growth in them. That was really inspiring to me. Watching students go from being bullied to really owning their condition. That has been my inspiration throughout this. I am curious to hear if I don't know if there is anything interesting here, but when you think about Tourette awareness challenges, the state of advocacy in the United States versus the UK, are there any interesting differences or unique challenges in the UK or vice versa that you've observed?
I think that the UK is definitely behind. And that's of no fault to the different charities or organizations that are here at all, because they're fighting as hard as they can. I think that a lot of the research has taken place in the USA. And I think that because the Tourette Association has been around for now 50 years, they've just done such a remarkable job. The Tourette Association of America, I'm assuming that's where you were a youth ambassador when you were a kid. Is that correct?
It was through the TAA. Yeah.
I just think that the community that they've been able to foster in terms of getting kids and adults with Tourette's together has really paved the way for people to be able to feel like they belong. I think in the UK, we are still years behind that happening. It's rapidly increasing as charities look at new ways of being able to get in front of people. I think that social media is really going to help with that because geography doesn't become as much of a burden anymore. But one of the main reasons that I wanted to become a global ambassador for the Tourette Association was to help spread that message beyond just the shores of the USA to further afield for a twofold thing. One, so people in other countries could see what the USA, what the Tourette Association of America were doing and to be inspired by that. And two, to allow those in the USA to begin to see what else is going on outside of the borders of the US and to see how other countries are affected or the learning or coping mechanisms they have, or, a better understanding of how other people go through things. I think that it's such a beautiful thing when people with Tourette syndrome come together and meet someone for the first time or are surrounded by people who are just like them and they see so much, in themselves. Every time I do one of these documentaries and I talk to people, I get this newfound understanding of like, oh my God, that's exactly what I went through too. I feel understood. Isn't that such a beautiful thing? And some of my best friends now who I have live with Tourette because again, we just understand each other. And it's really difficult to be able to explain it. I'm sure it's similar for people who are going through something, unique to themselves and they meet someone else who is going through the same thing and they just have this element of understanding, but it's just like a breath of fresh air. You feel freedom. You feel free because you don't have to pretend that you're something you're not. You can just put all your feelings out in your sleeve. You can let yourself be vulnerable and you can just be in the moment. And I think that's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
When I first went to, it was the National Tourette Association's conference, but it was back in 2008. This is when all of my advocacy work started, when it began. That was my first time being in a room with other people who had Tourette. And exactly that. It was so freeing. I could do my most embarrassing tics, the wildest, and no one cared. It was just people barely even noticed half the time. And that was whenever I see like the hashtag tic freely, that's what I remember. It's being in those environments where you're with other people who get it. It's freeing. It's liberating to be able to tic, and it doesn't matter. And that is the world I'd love to see us build with just not just Tourette circles, but neurodiversity in the public and allowing people to be themselves, having society that's less judgmental, less prone to make those assumptions, and letting them be their best versions. I know we didn't get a chance to talk too much about neurodiversity. Any thoughts there? I know you're also an advocate in that space. Anything there come to mind that you'd love to chat about?
We often hear about these co-occurring conditions, and I alluded to the fact earlier that 85% of people with Tourette syndrome have a co-occurring condition. But what I find is that when a lot of people who I know, when they're diagnosed in their youth, it's just the Tourette's. Everything is bundled into that Tourette diagnosis. And even if you have very clear signs of ADHD and OCD and all these other things, they're just bundled into the Tourette's. That's exactly what happened with me. I got my ADHD diagnosis 2.5 weeks ago after having lived with it for years. But I was never, ever aware that what I was going through, what I was feeling, what I was experiencing was ADHD. And separating the two out and looking at Tourette's over here and looking at ADHD over here, and having now done countless documentaries on Tourette syndrome, but my first documentary on ADHD and looking at the lived experiences of people with ADHD, it's like I've just seen my whole life flash before my eyes. And I think over the next several years, what we really need to focus on is, has this person got Tourette syndrome? Yes. Okay. Do they have anything else? Okay, let's look into that. And if they have got ADHD, that needs to be treated completely separately to just the Tourette syndrome. Because otherwise you're going to have two different paths and someone won't know which one they're meant to go down. And that has just been an eye-opening and life-changing experience for me to get this diagnosis. I think that the term neurodiversity as a whole, I think, is a wonderful one. It's in its infancy at this moment in time. I'm sure that in 10 years' time, people will say neurodiversity is an offensive word. It should be called this, because there's all these changes that rapidly happen. But I think the fact that the world is beginning to wake up and see that people do think differently is just a stunning thing. There's a beautiful phrase right now, and it's taking, another spin on what's wrong with you. It's what's strong with you. And I think that we have all these beautifully neurodiverse minds out there that, again, people may deem those who are neurodiverse to be this failure and, burden on society and that they'll never achieve anything. But the truth is that the complete opposite couldn't be, more true. Like, we do have these remarkable skill sets that the average human being just isn't able to tap into. And when we have, these things that we become borderline obsessed with because we're so passionate about them, we genuinely can change the world. And here's the thing. If you look at most of the change makers in today's society who are combating climate change, who are trying to pave the way for good, who are out there doing the most remarkable things to change the very face of the planet, most of these people are neurodiverse. Most of these people think differently. It is my belief, and I can't prove this by any means, but it's my belief that neurodiverse people are an evolved state of human being. It's my belief that we are the next evolution of mankind. And what we are going through right now is that new infancy period. But fast forward, and we will be the new normal until we are replaced by the next evolution, who is the new normal. And so, in fact, there is no normal. We're constantly on this journey of evolution. And I think that's exactly what we are.
I love that. Well put. Any advice that you would give to adults with Tourette, the whole umbrella?
God, I mean, where to even begin? I think alluding to what Aidy said, my good friend Aidy, honestly, be kind to yourself and be realistic to yourself. Know that there will be hard days ahead. Know that it's not always going to be easy. Know that you don't always have to power through, because if you don't, you're a very weak human being who can't achieve anything. Know your limits. It's okay to take a moment to just be at one with yourself to then power forward. And what you'll probably find is that, you're not just this weak person. You've probably worked your ass off as hard as you possibly can because of that Tourette superpower, which has given you burnout. So it's not some kind of weakness. It's you working so hard, so passionately, embracing something that you love so much that you're actually kind of making yourself sick from burnout. So give yourself that time. Don't be afraid to venture out of your comfort zone. Don't be afraid to meet new people. Don't be afraid to meet people with Tourette, because that's such a remarkable thing to do. And seeing someone through the same lens as you've seen yourself throughout your entire life. I think that if someone is in a dark and a scary place, go out there and find that passion point. It's not going to be easy. It might take a while to do it, but when you do, my God, you'll look back in your life and be so happy that you did. I'd say that if you've already found that passion point and you have that superpower, not supermarket, and I'd say if you've already found that passion point and you have that superpower, go out there and inspire other people. Pay it forward. For every person you see, who you see, yourself years before, for every kid who looks like they're in a dark, scary place, reach out, talk to their family, talk to them, help inspire them, give them hope. Because at the end of the day, our community is all that we have. And if we look after our community, that is what is going to shape the biggest change. That's how we embrace who we are, that's who we belong, and that's how we all thrive.
I love that so much. Aidy, thank you for your time here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering you to stretch the boundaries to live your best life. The NJ Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, NJCTS, its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented on this podcast. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any guest, nor do we advocate any treatment.